So far we've answered all the questions except for number 3. The Skraelings and the Vikings were always good friends. So the main story on these News of the Nations will be on the front page or the first page and the page that has the questions on it. But in the middle are other little stories. And I'm going to read you those stories. So just like a newspaper, I'll pause here. Just like a newspaper, there's other little stories that are told in the middle. So we're going to read this one right here where it talks about Viking sagas. If you remember, the sagas are the stories based upon real people. Viking sagas are the chief form of literature. So aside from court poetry composed in many Viking lands, the chief form of literature was the saga. So they had poetry, but they also had these sagas or stories. They were mostly royal, local, or family histories. They were written mostly in Iceland from 11th through the 14th century, so from the year 1000 through the year 13, They were written from the 11th century through the 14th century, so the 11th century would be the year 1000 and the 14th century would be the year 1300. Here is depicted Snorri Sturluson. So we learned about Snorri. This is probably not the same Snorri that was born in Vinland. This is another Snorri. Probably the greatest saga writer of the period. Some of his famous sagas are Njal Saga, about the burning of Njal's home with the family inside. Oh, probably not a happy story there. It is considered the finest single saga. Another excellent saga is Egil Saga. Its hero Egil Skallagrímsson was a major poet as well as a ruthless fighting man. He lived from about 910 to the year 990. In the saga, Egil composes his finest poem, Lament for My Sons. It is from sagas such as these that we can piece together the history of Leif Ericson, who was the first known European to discover America. Leif followed up a chance sighting of new lands to the southwest of Greenland, where his father had founded or started a colony. The saga tells of Leif's discovering Vinland, known as Grape Country, and later Markland, which is known as Forest Country, among other names. So that talks about the story of Leif Erikson discovering the new land. Now here we have a little ad advertising Viking weapons for sale. So this is what the Viking weapons would have looked like. So Eric the Red was selling his weaponry. Having been banished or kicked out of Norway and Iceland, he leaves for Greenland to establish a Viking colony. All of his brightly painted shields, axes, spears, swords are decorated with inlays of silver wire and yellow, which is a black inlay. So this black part right here, this would be another metal to help decorate his weaponry. And they're up for auction to the highest bidder. So that's just a little want ad for the Viking weapons. Now we have Vikings encounter native people. If you remember those native people, they referred to them as the Skraelings. So the Vikings' first encounters with the native people of North America, whom they called Skraelings, were friendly. So at first, their encounters were friendly. Then the Norsemen, or the Vikings, traded woven cloth and other goods for furs. Conflict developed, however, and after a few years, the Greenlanders were forced to abandon their settlements. So the Vikings were forced to abandon their settlements. So if we go back to our questions, one of the true-false questions I remember said, the Skraelings and the Vikings were always good friends. Well, here it talks about that conflict developed, and after a few years, the Greenlanders were forced to abandon their settlements. So if they are in conflict with each other, I would say that they're not always good friends. So for that one, number 3, the Skraelings and the Vikings were always good friends. That should be false, that they were not always good friends. Now, if you're watching the first video, and this is the second video, we finished with our questions, but we're not quite done yet. We have one story left. And this one is about Leif Ericson discovering a great new continent. And then usually they have a little comic here on the bottom too. So Leif Ericson discovers a great new continent. Fierce winds drove a Viking ship southwestward across the Atlantic Ocean. Sometimes the narrow open ship with its bright colored sail was almost hidden from sight by huge waves. Whenever the ship rose high on the crest of a wave, the dragon head on its bow or at the front was outlined against a darkened sky. A tall, fair-haired sailor gripped the large oar that steered the ship. And to be fair-haired means that you have very, very blonde hair, really, really light. Most Scandinavian people from Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, those countries we learned where the Vikings came from, they have fair hair. His shoulders ached as he strained to hold his small ship steady in the choppy seas. This man was Leif Ericson, the son of a brave Viking chief, Eric the Red. For many days and nights, Leif Ericson and his crew of 35 Vikings had been sailing across the stormy waters of the Atlantic. They had left Norway to return to their homes in Greenland, which Leif's father had discovered 15 to 20 years before. However, a storm had forced the ship off its course. Twice during the voyage, they had seen land far in the distance. Both times the storm had blown their tiny ship away from the land. Finally, the storm was over. Far to the west, Leif Ericson saw a welcome sight. "Land!" he shouted, pointing to a green wooded coast. When Leif and his men reached the shore, they looked at the tall green trees. How different this land is from the cold, treeless coast of Greenland, they thought. As they walked farther inland, they found wild grain growing in the sunny meadows. In many places, thick vines were heavy with clusters of grapes. Leif and his men picked grapes and cut some of the grain to take back to their families and their friends in Greenland. They called this new land Vinland or Wineland. It was destined to be named America. And then our last little section, usually they have a little comic and it says, teacher saying, "What happened to the money?" The mom is saying, "What happened to the money I gave you?" "I swallowed it." "Well, why?" So the little boy says, "I swallowed the money." And mom's asking why. The boy says, "Because you said it was my lunch money." So a lot of times, unfortunately, the U.S. kids are not very funny. So if you don't want to read them, you don't have to read them. But my point with this video, actually both of them, was not only so that you could see what a News of the Nation was like, but also so you can see how I would like you to read those. I want you to look at the questions first, go through the questions, find out what you're reading for, and then I want you to go back in the story and make sure you're double checking your answers. There should be no reason why you're getting anything less than, there's 10 points or 10 questions on these, why you're getting anything less than like an 8, 9, or 10 out of 10. Because all the answers are there. You just have to go make sure you're going back, taking your time, and rereading the story if you have to. And then also making sure you're looking at the captions to the pictures, because the captions tell you a lot about what's going on in the pictures as well. So this one was about Leif the Lucky locating a new land. The next one we're going to be reading is about Marco Polo. And no, we're not talking about the pool game, although the pool game did come from Marco Polo, I believe, the actual person, but there was an actual person named Marco Polo. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Have a great day. Bye.